Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Cecil, and today we're going to be talking about post-burnout stress disorder. So I'm going to be honest with you guys. This is a term that I've completely made up. The reason is because I've seen this constellation of symptoms in my clients over and over and over and over, and so I wanted to give it a name, right? There's a term post-traumatic stress disorder, which refers to the aftermath of somebody who experiences a physically or psychologically traumatic event. There's a term called developmental trauma disorder, which refers to people who experience a prolonged pattern of childhood neglect, hostility, role reversal, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I wanted to coin this term post-burnout stress disorder to talk about what happens to people who are in jobs for an extended period of time where they burn out and then they have a lot of trouble getting back on their feet because that stays with them and haunts them the same way that those other experiences with PTSD or DTD stay with people and haunt people. Now, I'm not saying that, being in a burnout job is comparable to, seeing somebody get killed in war or anything like that. But it is something that tends to stay with people for, if they don't do anything about it for a long period of time. It is something that has these kinds of extensive lifelong effects if not addressed. So let's dive into what that looks like. So a couple things that I see in post-burnout stress disorder. One is people have a huge aversion to anything that even remotely reminds them of the situation that they're in. Normally, this will cause people to leave an industry entirely, right? Like if they were working in a hospital and the hospital was horrible, they'll just leave the medical field and start over. And sometimes that's not actually the best choice, but if it's a situation where somebody's in that position, it's very difficult to work around that, right? It's very difficult to dissolve that. It takes a lot of time. It can be done, absolutely. And I've seen it happen. I mean, I've had somebody who was in sales. She was completely burned out. She was exactly in this spot. And then we dissolved all the stress and then she just got back on the horse and, kept doing it and there wasn't a problem. And yes, she had a bigger destiny. She had something else to do, but that was something where she could stay in a particular job for longer while she put other stuff together. The second thing that I'll see people will get into a position where they just don't even want to go back to work at all, right? They'll leave, they'll quit, and they'll just stop working, and they'll get into this like panic state where they can't get anything done. They're just watching their bank account dwindle. Eventually, they get down to zero, and then they panic. Like, I don't know, I don't have any money, and I don't want to work. And that's obviously not a good situation. But you'll start to see this enduring procrastination, right? I'll see people who are, should be building a business, but they're only putting in like 3 or 4 hours a day. I'll see people who should be going to get a job, but they can't, summon themselves up to apply for anything, right? Because they just don't want to work, right? And it's like there's this big, long detox. The problem with this is, unless you're ready to retire financially, that's an ultimate death knell because you just destroy all your assets, you destroy all your savings, you dwindle everything down. So that's something that really, 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 for the sake of your financial health, has to be fixed. And then the third symptom that I'll see people who they'll take things very personally and it will create this hit to their self-esteem. And they'll just be filled with self-doubt and self-judgment and blame. And normally that's because those are patterns that they learned earlier in their life. Those are patterns where they've already been harsh on themselves about other things. They're probably already harsh on themselves about their fitness. They're probably already harsh on themselves about their relationships or, other areas of their life. But then they'll take something where that, burnout situation will then take that pattern of self-judgment and magnify to this whole new level. And they'll just, feel like there's just something fundamentally wrong and broken about them. And then it will really weigh on them, sometimes for decades. So overall, that's the constellation that is post-burnout stress disorder. Now, what can we do to fix it? Because every one of these symptoms is fixable, right? So let's take a look at them one by one. So the first symptom we were talking about was an aversion to anything that is remotely similar to what you did before. So the way that you get around this is you have to actually isolate what was it about the prior job that caused you to burn out. You have to isolate all those factors because it's normally not one thing. It may have been your boss was a jackass. It may have been you were working 80 hours a week. It may have been, all this other stuff. But let's say if it's because your boss was screamed at you abusively every Tuesday and you worked 80 hours a week, and those were the two things that caused you to burn out, that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole industry and your entire skill set is no longer something that you want to follow, right? So you have to learn to get specific about what it was that caused the problem, and then segment that off. And then when you're looking at new opportunities, test them against those metrics, right? Instead of saying, oh, this looks like that thing, because, the human brain likes to make these big diffuse connections, test it specifically against the metrics that you've isolated. Now, let's talk about the procrastination element. So the procrastination element, a lot of it comes from the detoxing situation, right? So when you're burned out, you have to detox, right? I've been there. Most of my clients have been there. The question is, how long do you detox for after you get burned out? Now, I can tell you 3 weeks of zero work will have you fully recovered, fully detoxed, if you aren't making things harder than they need to be. That's the catch. Most people make things harder than they need to be. Part of it is what we were talking about the self-judgment and self-worth, which we'll dive into. But after 3 weeks, the thing is, you can't necessarily jump right back in at the same level of intensity as when you left. It's like if you go to the gym, if you stop working out for a couple months, you can't just go back to the gym and start lifting the same weights that you did before. You have to ramp back up to it. So let's say you're burned out. Let's say you take 3 weeks completely off. You do nothing, you totally detox, right? Then you add, a little bit of work, right? Maybe you're starting a business, maybe you're just sending out some job applications. One of the things is that freelancing and entrepreneurship are a lot easier to kind of, create a great gradient where you're going up in the amount of work, whereas a job is kind of hit or miss. But you could do like a part-time job. You could say, hey, I'm going to go get a part-time job as a barista at Starbucks. It really doesn't matter, right? The point is that you start doing some work, right? And then you start doing some work, and then you get back into the flow of it. And then you say, okay, great. Now I'm going to go back to doing the full amount that I want to be doing. Maybe that's, going full-time on your business. Maybe that's getting a full-time job. Maybe it's working 40 hours a week freelancing. Doesn't matter, right? But the key is that you give yourself that 3 weeks of detox. Then you gradually build up the amount of work you're doing to the best that you can. But you have to have steady progress. What I've seen very often is that people get in this situation. They'll detox for their 3 weeks. They won't want to go back to work, so they'll just keep not working. And then after like 2 months, they've just got this sense of, there's no urgency, there's no procrastination, and they've gotten, weak, as it were, right? Mentally, right? They've lost the mental override. And it's just like somebody who gets, flabby when they don't go to the gym. And so then when it comes back, they really can't bring themselves to work as much as they used to. And then they start making it a part of their identity. And they say, oh, well, I'm just not the same that I used to be because, I burned out and I can't do this anymore. And they make it this permanent story, right? And then guess what? If you make this permanent story, it comes true, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be at all, right? What you can do is you can say, hey, listen, it's, I can't go 100%, but I can do this gradient. I can build up slowly. And then you can change that story bit by bit by bit. And finally, the third one is the enduring self-doubt and the enduring hit of self-esteem. And the most important thing here is to realize that in all likelihood, it wasn't about you. Now, yes, if you came in and you came into the office naked and threw bananas at your boss and they fired you for that, then yes, it was about you. If you failed to do your job, right? If your job was to make sure that, certain objectives were met and you didn't meet those objectives, then yes, it was about you. But most of the time when people are burned out and they get fired, it wasn't about them. Normally, there is no clear metric that the boss can point to and say, oh, you didn't meet this. They just fire you and they contrive some BS reason and they contrive some story. I mean, I had a client who was falsely accused of sexual harassment. He was completely framed. He left his Gmail account open. Somebody opened it up and sent some email that wasn't in his linguistic patterns whatsoever, wasn't anything that matches any language of anything he'd ever sent it from his thing. And then that got blown back on. It was ridiculous, but somebody was trying to frame him. They wanted him out because there was some other issue there. And that's normally how things end. They don't end legitimately, right? Sadly, most employers don't have good performance metrics. They don't have standards and self-development and all this kind of stuff. So when something ends, it's normally not about you. It's normally about them. It's normally about the fact that, for some reason, you guys just didn't mesh personality-wise, right? Now, can you fix that? Yeah, absolutely. You can fix things like that, right? But that's not your fault. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person or you're a bad doctor, a bad employee or any of that stuff, right? What it means is that for some reason, things didn't work out. It wasn't a fit. And they played just as much a role in it as you did. Sometimes it's not even about them either. Sometimes it's about your destiny and the universe and the bigger picture. One thing I've seen is if you are not on the right track, the universe will kick you in the ass until you get on the right track. And weird situations, weird coincidences, weird conflicts will come up to make that happen. And then it's not about you. It's not about your boss. It's not about your colleagues. It's about something much bigger than you can see right now. So guys, those are the 3 symptoms. But more than treating the symptom, the most important thing is to treat the root cause. And the root cause of post-burnout stress disorder is that you're not doing something that you love, is that you're not living your purpose. Because if you are, it deals with everything else, right? When you're living your purpose, you're in the state of flow and confidence. You don't have these enduring doubts, right? Like, yes, they can crop up, but it's not but you say, hey, listen, this is important to me that I'm going to power through, right? When you're living for your purpose, you don't let yourself procrastinate too much because you know that this is too important. You have something pulling you forwards. You're not just running away from something, you're running towards something, right? And when it comes to an aversion to, something you've ever done, well, if you're living your purpose, then you know that, hey, this is what's relevant. This is what's not relevant. You may very well be in a completely different industry, but you know that you're doing the right thing, right? And if it's like, hey, I can't afford to say, hey, I don't like that aspect of it because it reminds me of this thing, because this is too important to me. This is my personal mission. This is my destiny. This is my conviction, right? So I just need to make sure that these aspects are dealt with, and then I can get back on track. That kind of determination comes from purpose. So guys, that's the root cause. I've taught you how to address the symptoms. I've taught you how to address the root cause. Now, if you guys want to talk to me about this, if you have post-burnout stress disorder, if you're looking for help of where to go next, if you're trying to plan your career, if you're trying to get clear on your purpose, these are things that I specialize in. So feel free to give me a call. It's at www.oculusinstitute.com/scheduling. You can just go there. You can pick a time. You can get everything registered. We'll find a time that's convenient for both of us. It's automatically linked with my calendar, and we'll get on the phone and we'll talk, right? We'll get clear on where you are. We'll get clear on where you want to go. And then we'll help figure out the best next steps to get you there. So guys, wishing you the best. If you are suffering from post-burnout stress disorder, listen, I've been there. I get it. Recover, do what you need to do, but get back on track. And don't let it become a part of your identity, because you can be stronger than that. Wishing you all the best again. I will see you guys in a couple days. Farewell.